Kum Lerna Blat Gemara. This is the Gemara Daf Samach Daled for the second day of Chedesh of Mar Chesed, first day of Chesed. Says the Mishnah. A man comes along and says, Kidashti is biti, I married off my daughter, Kidashtia Vigidashtia. I married her off and I got a divorce. What's the point of telling us that? So now I want you to know you can never marry a kohen because he's a divorcee. The question is, do we trust the father or not? Kishiktana. I did it when she was a minor because I had the right to. And she's still a ktana, which means that if he wants to, he can do it all over again. He has no reason to lie about it because if he wants, she's a 10-year-old girl, he can go find somebody, a kohen, somebody to marry and then convince the guy to divorce her. Neman, he is believed because if he wants to harm her, he can harm her right now. So we trust him. What happens? He says, this happened when she was a minor, but today, she's now 14 years old. And he's telling you a story about something happened. He no longer has the capacity to do anything about it. In that case, because he's not believed, because it's no longer biyadai. He can't do anything about it, and we're not going to believe him that he's going to harm his daughter. Case number 3. Nish base, if she was taken, he says, my daughter was taken captive by Goyim. And we learned already, if a girl was taken captive by Goyim, we take the stringent view there's a possibility that the Goy had a relation with this girl while she was in captivity. And the rule is that if you live with anyone, even just once, that is forbidden to marry, you now become you cannot marry a Kohen. You're like a Zayna, you cannot marry a Kohen. So if the father says she was taken captivity, and I'm the one who redeemed her. In other words, she could no longer marry a Kohen, Midrabanan. I don't care what age he is, he's not believed. And the question will be, why, in this case, if she's a Ketana, is the father not believed? Because what's he achieving by telling us the story? That she cannot marry a Kohen. But L'chaira, if he wants to harm her, he can do other things. He can marry a divorcer, like we said before, he can do other things. Says the Gemara. What's the difference? Reisha biyode, seif la biyode. It would be explained before. The Reisha, it's up to him. When she's a Ketana, he can marry her off and divorce her, and it's safe enough. As the Gemara, one thing I don't understand. What's the purpose of saying she's taken captivity? She can no longer marry a Kohen. Now, but can't he marry her off and divorce her and achieve the same thing? So Rashi explains no, because when you say that she was taken captivity, there's one more stringency that applies. And that is, if you say my daughter was married and divorced, okay, she cannot marry a Kohen. But if she is a daughter of a Kohen, she herself is a Bas Kohen, after her divorce, she was married to whoever it was. After divorce, she goes home, she can eat Truma again. But if she was taken into captivity and then set free, she cannot, and she goes home, she can no longer eat Truma because she's considered a Zaina. So if he comes up with this story, concocts a story, or maybe it's true, that she was taken captivity and everything else, so the Gemara is going to say, okay, but if he wanted to harm her to the extent, not only she cannot marry a Kohen, but that she cannot go home and eat Truma, there are other things that he could have done right now while she's a Ketana, so why don't we believe him? For example, says the Gemara, he can marry her off to a Kohen that is a Chol. For example, this Kohen was born from a father and a mother, the father Kohen married a divorcee, which is forbidden. So he is a Chol, and therefore if he's a Chol, and then this daughter, he takes his 10-year-old girl and marries his Chol, she can no longer marry a Kohen again, and she cannot go home to eat Truma. So he could achieve the same thing. So why don't we trust him? So he has that ability. So why don't we trust him? Say, that's not a problem. Because there's an opinion called Rabbi Stoy ben Yehuda, and this mission of ours agrees with him. And that is what? Rabbi Stoy ben Yehuda holds that if a woman marries a cholol, she herself does not become a cholol. Why not? Because their daughter does not become a chol. If a chol marry a chol, the kohen is already a chol. Not the kohen. If a kohen marries someone he's forbidden to marry, then obviously their children are cholol. But the kohen himself is a chol. Married an ordinary woman, he's a chol. Their daughter is not a chol. And if the daughter is kosher, so too is the mother. So if you were to marry off the chol, nothing would happen to her. But I just throw mikveh tarach lalin, that the fact that the daughter is treated like a Yisrael, she cleanses her mother. That means that the wife of the chol is not a problem. So the father who married a chol wouldn't have achieved anything. So anyway, okay, but the mamza could have married off to a mamza. If she would have married a mamza, she can no longer marry a kohen. She cannot go back home to eat truma. The Gemara says no. I'll make the whole like Kiva that says that you cannot, if you marry someone where there's an avera, there's no marriage at all. Rabbi Kiva is of the opinion that even if it's merely a lav, the marriage is not functions, not effective. So therefore, he cannot marry her to a mamzer because there's no marriage. It doesn't take effect. So you must say, okay, even according to Rabbi Kiva says that only Lavid do that, but he can give her to a Kohen Gadol, which is only an asay. A Kohen Gadol should marry someone that is not a widow, and an asay, the Kiddushin are effective, but she now can no longer marry a Kohen again, and she cannot go home to eat truma. Ukirab Shemai, like Shemai, the Tanya Shemai says, Min HaKoyel Rabbi Kiva Mamzer. Rabbi Kiva holds if you live with someone in sin, your children are mamzedim. Chutz ma'almana lekohen gadol, and because the kedushin are not valid, except where there's an asay like an almana, except almana kohen gadol. Why is that? Not because of an asay, but because you have a pasuk. Shari amra toida lo yikach lo yichal. Don't a kohen gadol should not marry lo yichal, and if you do, your children will end up being chalalim. So what do we learn from the chiluli ma'isa? The only thing a kohen gadol can do is turn the children to chalalim, but they ain't oisim mamzedim. Doesn't make them mamzedim. So you couldn't marry your daughter off to a kohen gadol. And then she can no longer marry a Kohen and go back home. So let's believe him when he says, my daughter's kidnapped. Says the Gemara, no, Rabbi Sheviv. Our Mishnah follows Rabbi Sheviv that goes further. It's not just Amon Kohen Gadol. Anyone who lives in sin, according to Rabbi Kiva, the children are mamzerim, and there's no marriage. If there's no marriage, and the father couldn't have done that, and therefore she can marry a Kohen, and therefore she can go back home. There's no migu here. Let's scream at because Kiva says, everyone, if it's forbidden, it's a mamzer. That only makes sense if Rabbi Sheviv holds ila taimei de nafshe. If he's coming up with a new halacha and he's explaining Rabbi Kiva, I hold Rabbi Kiva holds any sin that he does, anything that he does in a form of sin is not a marriage. Okay. So therefore, the father could not have put her into marriage, couldn't give her into marriage, because there's no such marriage. And that's why we don't believe the father when he says, oh, she was taken to captivity and I released her. But if all he's doing is coming to argue with her samai, which means he's only arguing the case of a kohen godly, I don't believe in this layikach layichal, then at least what would he hold then when it comes to an asay, for example, marrying a mitzri or marrying an adoimi? That would be a valid marriage. So the father could have married off there, and then she'd be a halal. He could never marry a kohen again. So let's trust the father when he says you take captivity. He could have married off the chayav esay. That's the Gemara's question. That's number one. Then Rabashi says, I don't like your hope shot from the beginning. The Tizbara, you said that the reason why a man said that I married my daughter off when she's 9 years old, and now she's still like only 10 years old, and she's divorced. We trust him is because he has the right to marry her off. But does he have the right to get a divorce? But he has control to make sure that this chassan divorces her. Number one. Number two, and even marriage. You think that what the father can just marry her off? What happened that nobody wants to marry her? It's not in your control. Can you do it against the will? Rashi, I'll explain to you the Mishnah. The Torah said a father is believed to say that my daughter is married when she's a ktana. How do a father believe to say that my daughter is married and therefore nobody else can marry her? It says I gave my daughter to this man. Li'ish, when he says li'ish to a man, also that means no other man can marry her. And hazeh, and when he says this man, he's allowing this daughter to live with this particular man. He tira bin Yisur. So when it comes to marriage, the Torah believe, but when it comes to kidnapping, taking captivity, nowhere does a Torah say we believe the father, and therefore we don't believe him. He's trying to harm his daughter. Next Mishnah. Misha Amar, a person says, Bishas Misosai. A person says, as he's dying in his deathbed, and he had no children, he says, and the question is like this, even though he had no children with this wife, if he had children from another wife, then there's no mitzvah of yibum because he had children. Doesn't matter from this wife. But he tells his wife, Yeshli Banim, I want you to know that I have children from another wife, even though we don't have children. So you're free. Now when you believe. He never mentioned a word before. We believe him. He's making her life easier. Or Yeshli Achim, if he says, look, even though we don't have children, but I have a brother, and my friend, you're stuck. Ain't no Neman. You're harming her, he's not believed. Now, till now, we assumed that she's a free woman. She never knew that he had any brothers. Suddenly, out of the blue, he says he had a brother. So the Mishnah says we don't believe him. Now the Gemara will discuss that. Alma, so what does it seem from the Mishnah? Neman lahate ve'ein neman lesser. We believe the man on his deathbed that he wants to make his life easier, but not when he wants to make it more difficult. So the Chayla says the Gemara, Neman masnisin the like Rab Nasan. Our Mishnah does not conform with Rab Nasan. What's the story? Who's this Rab Nasan? The Tanya Lit Nebrai says follows. Bishas Kiddushin, when he married this girl, Amar, he said, Yesh loy bonim. He told her up front, I have other children. In other words, he said, marry me and don't worry about Yibum. Even if we have no children, you're all right. But Bishas Misa, on his deathbed, he changed his story. He changed his tune. Amar, he said, I want you to know that I was lying. Ain loy bonim. I had no children. Question is, now her life will be difficult. Do we believe what he said at the Kiddushin, or do we believe what he says now? Or Bishas Kiddushin Amar Ein Lo Achim. During Kiddushin, he said, look, I have no brothers. So whether we have children or not, don't worry. But Bishas Misam Ishlachim, when he's dying, he said, yes, I have a brother, you're stuck. Nema Lahatebe Nema Laesa. Rebbe clearly says we don't trust him if he's going to ruin her life. However, Rab Nosson says, Af Nema Laesa. Rab says, no. If a guy is lying on a deathbed, whatever he says now, we trust him. So our Mishnah obviously doesn't work out with Rab Nosson. Omar Rava says, Shiny Hassan. Rava says maybe there is different in the Brisa. Why? He said one story when they got married, and he changed his story. He changed his tune when he was dying. Usually, when a person is dying, there's no point in lying anymore because you're about to meet your Creator. You're probably telling us the honest truth, and you probably regret that you deceived her at the time of marriage. You thought she'll never marry you if she thinks that you have brothers, so you deceived her. But now you want to tell the honest truth. So Rava says here is different because you're changing your story because kivan de b'shas misa. When do you change the story? Now that you're dying, is ema kushta kamar. Even though you're hurting her, but maybe you feel guilty and you want to tell her the truth. So we trust you because you're on your deathbed. In our Mishnah, you said nothing during the Kiddushin. It's just assumptions that were made. So therefore, suddenly he woke up and he said, I have a brother. Then you're just trying to hurt her for whatever reason. But in this case, Rab Nosson, you told her in the beginning you have no brothers, and now you're changing the story. What happened there? Must be that you feel guilty. So I'm like, I don't understand. It doesn't make sense. The lav, the kol, the kenu, what you're saying doesn't make sense at all. Abaye says to Rav. In this brisa, you first told her a story that you have no brothers. And now you're contradicting what you originally said. We don't know which one to believe. Yet we say, Omer Kushgami said, because he's dying, he's probably telling the truth. In our Mishnah, he never said nothing. He's not contradicting what he originally said. He said nothing. And now he's dying and he's telling you, I have a brother. Surely we should believe him. Even in the case he's proven a liar, he lied. The question is, when did he lie? When he got married, or now he's dying? You're going to say, trust him now because he's dying. He's probably telling the truth. Surely when he's not contradicting his original statement, surely we should believe what he says on his deathbed. Kushtikama masnisin the loikamar of the body. He's not contradicting the words. Like Koshkin, surely you should trust him. And what Bai says, I'll tell you how it works. Masnisin, our mission is the loy muchzalam ba'achi, the loy muchzalam ba'bani. Our mission is talking about when they got married, we assumed no children, no brothers, no children and no brothers. That's what we assumed. In other words, this woman married thinking or under the assumption, the chazaka, that she will never be stuck with the Yavam because there's no brothers around. Or that she had children, whatever it is. Whatever the chazaka was, she will never have to end up with a brother, either because there were children or there were no brothers. Okay. And then the bani, the amrinan, even the loy muchdalam b'bani, the loy ba'achi. Since, as far as we know, there were no children and there were no brothers, and therefore, Omar, if he says now, Yeshli Bani, if he says now, I have children, he's consistent with what we originally assumed. Therefore, Neman. Yeshli Achim, but if he's changing the two now, the Chazaka was that there were no brothers. And now suddenly he comes along and says, as he's dying, yes, I have a brother. Ain't a Neman, he's not believed. Why? Lav kol kemine the asla kuli alma. He's not. That's the Mishnah. So the Mishnah is talking about the initial chazaka was that she's free, and now you're changing that. If you we don't trust her. So how come what about the Brisa? And Rav Nosson says we believe what he says on his deathbed. But Brisa is talking about. You turn the page. The Brisa is talking about the Samar Dalo and Bezot. Brisa is talking about the murziklan ba'achi. The Bryce is talking about we have a chazaka initially that they were brothers. We heard that they were before even they got married. We assumed they were brothers. And we had no idea about children, but we knew they were brothers. And then when he got married, he says, "Don't believe what you thought. You think that I have brothers? No." So there were three steps. Before they got married, chazaka was there were no brothers. When he got married to her, he said, "I want you to know I do have brothers." And then now that he's on his deathbed, he says again that do or don't have brothers. Oh, sorry. So what happened with this? The subject was they were brothers. Came the Kiddushin, he says to her, "No, I got no brothers. Don't worry about it. I got no brothers. And I have children. You're all taken care of." So at the Kiddushin, he was changing the chazaka. And now, when he's dying, he goes back to the original chazaka and he says, "Look, the truth is I do have brothers like you thought initially, and I have no children." And that's going to be the argument of Rebbe Ram Nosson, which is totally unrelated to our Mishnah. And the argument is as follows. The Amrin, we say, at the Kiddushin, when he said to her, "Look, I have no brothers," why did he say that? To spare her the trouble of marrying the brother-in-law. If he wanted to save her, he had a migui. He could have just given her a divorce, a conditional divorce. Say, "Look, I'm giving you a conditional divorce. If chas v'shalom, I pass away, this divorce will take effect a minute before I die," and he would have freed her. So he had a strong migui. So if he said, "I have no brothers," we should believe him because of malay l'shakir. If he's just lying in order to deceive her, he could have just given her a get and be upfront with her. What's the big deal? So it must be telling the truth. So first we had a chazaka, that they were brothers. And then came along a migui, and he said to her, "Look, I got no brothers, don't worry about it. And I have children, so don't worry about it." But he has a migui, and he must be telling the truth. Because if he could have just given her a get. So if he did have brothers, he could have just given her a get. So Mala the Shaka, why would he lie? And my comment, what was the purpose of the Gemara? To make sure that to avoid the whole problem of Yom. Motzi Amar, he could have said Patala Begita. And now he comes along and he changes the story and goes back to the Chazaka. Rebbe says Mali L'Shaka is so powerful, Ki Edim Dami, just like if there were two witnesses. So at the time, conditions as if there were two witnesses that there were no brothers and that they were children. But also Edim Ak Chazaka. So the Edim have the power to cancel the original Chazaka, and therefore we don't believe what he says right now. Because at the time of Kiddushin, they're so powerful what you said, because you could have given her a get. You didn't. That means you're telling her the truth. We'd ignore the chazakas. But Abnasan holds Mali l'shaka is ki chazaka. He says that the miga Mali l'shaka is no different than a chazaka. It's equal. So therefore, we have a chazaka versus a chazaka. We don't know which one to believe. And now that he comes along and he corroborates the first chazaka, therefore we believe him. Next Mishnah. The next Mishnah we already had previously in the Gemara. A man gets he says he meets somebody else and says, "Look, my daughter have a bunch of girls. My daughter's engaged to your son." So first of all, any girl over 12 and a half years old is not included because the father has no right to marry her off. Now what happened was he has two wives, each one of them has a group of girls. But Amar, he comes back, he says, I was at this place and I married off Biti Agdoila, my older daughter. Now, which daughter? It could be the first wife, both girls are older, and the second wife, both girls are younger. It could be that both older means one of the two of the older group, could be the oldest of the older group, or could be the oldest of the younger group. I don't know. Any day, I meant the oldest. Or the older in the second group, or the youngest in the older group who happens to be older than the oldest in the younger group. So the din is none of them can get married to anybody until they receive a divorce from this guy. The only one that's free is definitely the youngest, the Mazinka, because that wasn't included. Divrei Rab Meir. Those are the words of Rab Meir. Rab Yosi says no. If you were vague, you probably meant, you said the oldest, you probably meant the oldest girl. Kulam mutaris. They're all permitted, chutz min except the oldest girl. What happens? He says, Kedashti is biti aktana. The same principle, but the other way around. I said my youngest daughter, my younger daughter. The any they don't know, Tanas, I meant the youngest, Tanas, or in the first group, the younger one there, or the older in the younger group, which is younger than the younger in the older group. They're all forbidden. The only one that's clear, that's not included, is the oldest. Divir Rameya. Rabbi Yossi says, Kulan Matar, they're all permitted. Chutz min Aktana, you won't be vague. You probably meant the youngest. Now, the principle is the same in these two cases. The Gemara is going to know why we have to argue in both cases. So, Gemara, quickly. First of all, Haktanas Bechlal. It seems that all the girls are included. Let's say the younger group, both sisters are included in the suffix. Now, remember, we had an argument about Yerova. If you say to two girls, two sisters, I want your engagement, I don't remember which one it is, it's a Kiddushin that can never be consummated because if it's not the right one, it's the sister of the one that is the right one. And according to Abaya, there's no Kiddushin, the Kiddushin is effective. According to Rav, it's not. Here we see that all the girls are affected, they cannot get married. So it's clear that even though they cannot marry, yet the Kiddushin had an effect. Supporting Abaya, question on Rabbah. Says the Gemara, Shama b'nei Kiddushin, Shem shall be, have a Kiddushin, Kiddushin. You're talking about here, we're talking about over here, there's only one older girl and one younger girl, and that's it. There's no Ketana, so therefore only one of them is engaged. There's no two sisters here. Says the Gemara, it says the adults, plural. My Bible is we're talking about adults generally in the world, not in a particular family, in this family. So the Gemara, what's the chiddush in the Mishnah that if you say I married off my daughter, the girls over 12 and a half not included? Of course not included. You have no reign over them. She asked her father, do me a favor, find me a shidduch. So Ma'atem would have thought, there's a possibility he accepted for her. Not at all. A person would not forsake an act that he can have a benefit because he gets to keep the money if he marries off the younger daughter. But he has no benefit from marrying off the older daughter. That's the Gemara. What do you mean? Surely she would have said to her father, you can keep the money. I just want to get married. I feel like nevertheless he'll probably marry the younger daughter. Why? A person will not forsake a mitzvah that he has. Parents have a mitzvah to marry off the younger kids, but of a mitzvah to marry off an old daughter, which is no longer his mitzvah. Why do I need the same principle arguing by the older and the younger? Says Gemara as follows: if we only knew about older girls, I would say only over there Rameir will say, you know what? It could be anybody except the youngest. Every girl, because there's always somebody younger than them, you refer to her as the older one. The older one doesn't necessarily have to mean the oldest; it's the older one. But to call someone the younger one, you probably only call the youngest. Maybe Rebbe would agree when if you said the younger girl, you probably meant the youngest. Or again, if you only knew the second one, I would say only the case of younger. I would say only there Rabbi Yossi argues the younger means the youngest. But it comes to the older ones, maybe his mitzvah that include anybody who's older than somebody who's younger than them, we'll call them the older one. Therefore, says you want to remember, it seems from here. Now, what's the crux of the argument between Rameir and the Chachamim? Rameir savar mochis inish nafshel esreika. Rameir holds that a person can be vague. They have no issue with speaking in a way that entertains all kinds of possibilities. And Rabbi Yossi says no. People speak clearly. When he says younger, if he doesn't spell it out, it means the youngest. Older means the oldest. Says just exactly the opposite. What happened there? It's not the Mishnah. If someone makes a neder that won't do something or go somewhere, ad Pesach until Pesach. Ad means until the beginning. Also ad shegir. Ad means ad veloy ad bechal means till every Pesach. If he says ad sheyehei Pesach until Pesach happened, then also ad sheyotza. Then it's forbidden till Pesach is over. What happens at ad panei Pesach till the face of Pesach? There's two possibilities. The face of the beginning of can mean the very beginning of Pesach until then. Panei can also mean till the very last minute, because every minute is the face of the next minute. Could be till the last. It's very vague. Rameir says also achigir. People don't speak vaguely. It must be until the beginning of Pesach. And Rabbi Yossi says achiyetz till the end of Pesach. Exactly the opposite of our Gemara. Here Rabbi says people speak concise, and concise. Rabbi Yossi says no, they're vague, and our Mishnah is the other way around. You're right. Turn the names, swap the names around. But Tanya could be actually learned in the Brisa. This is the rule. Kosher's manikvu is a fixed time, but Amri says ad panei. The panei. Rameir says ad shiyos. Rameir says until it's over, and Rabbi Yossi says ad shiyagir. Rameir says until it starts. Rameir says you have to be clear. Rabbi Yossi says you have to be clear, and Rameir says people are vague, so therefore till the end of Pesach, exactly like our Mishnah. Oh, what I said about you. We're talking about the oldest and the youngest. What about the middle daughter? Do we refer to a middle? There's the older group and the younger group, and each group might. Our mission is not talking about a middle daughter, but if there is a middle daughter, would they be included in the suffix? Well, you said the older one. Does the older one mean the oldest in the first, let's say the older group, or the youngest in the older group because she's older than the one on the bottom? But the middle one, you would not have referred to the middle as the older. The middle one, you might have given a name or not. Says the Gemara. I'm going to buy it. Machlekes mishtakid about it. Whole argument is by the two groups. Aber bevas ach is only one group. The divrei hakol, everyone agrees. Gedoyle mamish, ketana mamish, and then so is bishmok. If there's only one group of girls, if you say the older one, you meant the oldest. If you said the younger one, you meant the youngest. Because the middle ones, how would you refer to the middle ones? As young or old? You would give them a name. You would call them by whatever their name is. Let me ask according to you. So what about and soy should be kachniya? What about the middle one in the top group? Tishrei, according to you, the middle one in the top group, even though she's older than the younger one, and you said the older one, but she should not be included because you're saying the middle one has a name. If the mission doesn't mention a word about the middle one, doesn't mention a word. So according to you, it should be permitted. So he says, not a problem. You know why the mission doesn't mention it? Because the mission is talking about a case. There's only two girls in the older group. In the first wife, there's the older, there's two girls, an older and a younger. That's it. There is no middle one. And that's why, but if there would have been, we'd have given a name. Says Gemara, I'll prove it to you. And that is if there was a middle girl there, the Mutaka would have mentioned, let's say the Mishnah holds, not like I said, but that not only the oldest daughter, but also the middle daughter should also be forbidden because she's older than the younger, then the Mishnah should have spelled it out. The Mishnah spells out the oldest of the older group or the youngest of the older group. Why does the Mishnah also say about the middle of the older group? Is that the middle of the group is taka permitted? So the Gemara, you're telling me the Mishnah should spell it out, and so you should be the the middle in the first group. Surely it's a suffix, and it should be us. Miktani was not mentioned. It's not mentioned at all. Says the Gemara. If you're going to say, if you hold that the middle one that is usher as well, then the Mishnah should have mentioned it. So the Gemara is saying, the oldest group, if we say that older means older compared to the younger group, then it should have said that the entire older group is usher. Because everyone in that older group is older than the younger groups. Everyone in that older group should have been included in the Isser. And yet doesn't mention it. There's a Hachi Hashta. Hasam over there, Tana, the Dali Yisuda. There it says that they don't have to spell out. We say, even though there's only two people there, that it's a bit confusing here, but Tana Didali Yisuda, the moment in the oldest group, you're right. Abai is like this. In the oldest group, everyone there is older than the younger groups. Everyone there could be called older, and they would all be usher. And why doesn't the Mishnah then mention in the oldest group, the middle one is usher as well? There's no need for it. Because once you spell out that the youngest in the oldest group is considered old because she's older than the oldest in the younger group, then obviously the middle one is older than the youngest in the top group, because the youngest one is definitely not called the older. Yet we call it the youngest in the top group is called the older. Why is the youngest in the top group called the oldest? Because it's older than the next group. So surely the middle one, you have a right to call her the older girl because she's older than the youngest in her own group. So the Mishnah doesn't have to spell it out. It's automatically understood. In the older group, says Abaya, everyone there is forbidden. It's the younger group. When you call the Ketana, when I say that the middle one is permitted. But when it comes to the lower group, if the middle one would be forbidden, then the Mishnah should have mentioned it. Because when you say young, you usually mean the youngest. She's not called young, and therefore, because the Mishnah didn't mention it, means the middle one, you would not have referred to her as the younger, you would have given her name. Pesach, when we just discussed this argument regarding Pesach, the Chikata Achazam is like one group. It's only called about Pesach. And yet, we have an argument if you mean the beginning or the end. So we see that even in one group, even only not two groups, even in one group, there's a possibility that it could be the beginning, it could be the end, and they're still arguing. And we're saying that the middle days are also called Pnei. Why? Because even the middle daughters are considered Pnei, or middle of Pesach, Pnei compared to the next day. Amalei said to him, Hassan Belishna the Alma, two different things. When it comes to Pesach, we're discussing what do people mean when they say these words. Mar Savar Ad Pnei HaPesach means Ad Kame Pesach. The one who says Pnei Pesach means before Pesach, or Mar Savar Ad the Mifta Pesach to the end of Pesach. We're only arguing there that not because they're arguing halachically that the middle of Pesach can still be called Pnei because it's a minute before the next minute and so on and so forth. No, the middle girl is not considered old, the younger or the oldest. And therefore, if you would have meant the middle girl, you would have given a name. Pesach, the argument is, how do people talk? When they say Pnei Pesach, what do they mean? They mean to the very end of Pesach, or do they mean the very beginning of Pesach? So totally unrelated issue. Okay, we'll stop here.